Okay, thank you very much, Kathy. I have a number of different slides. It's going to take 12 to 15 minutes, and I'll kind of talk through each of those, talking a little bit about the details regarding the referendum and the how and why. And then at the end, you'll have an opportunity to I'll respond to the questions that are in the chat. Just kind of for your information, the chat actually comes up in a different screen, so I'm not going to be able to answer the chats through the presentation. I will be able to answer the questions in the end. And if there is a question that I'm not able to answer, I'll do my best to circle back and put that in our other presentations. We have 3 presentations tonight, the 11th, we have it on the 16th and the 24th. So we're pleased about the opportunities to work with the community and talk about our referendum. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to present my screen. And with that, I'm just going to kind of open up a referendum. I just need to pause 1 second to check to make sure that everybody's seeing the presentation. And let me take 1 second to just pause here. Okay, all right. What is it? Oh, no problem. So a couple of things that we want to share with all of you. So we're saying, what are we seeking? And we're looking for $4.3 million, as Kathy talked to us earlier about. Again, currently we have a $3.5 million referendum. This operating referendum will go for 3 years to maintain existing programs, fund capital projects, again, support technology needs, retain quality staff, and if approved, it's going to support all schools within our district and all programs. So we're looking at an operational referendum. There are 4 topics that I want you to kind of understand when we're done today is how much does it cost, what happens if it fails, and what can we do? So I want to make sure I give you all of those facts and figures as we go through. So we look at the operating referendum, and we need those to maintain our current programs. And throughout this presentation, I'll give you some very specific examples about the Manitowoc Public School District and where we spend our money in comparison with other school districts and how we're trying to work through this levy. But what I do want you to know is that we're trying to continue to offer the wide variety of academic programs and services for all students. We want to continue to provide these great 21st century workforce and development skills. We want to protect our class sizes so that we can continue to have positive relationships with our kids and students. We want to continue to provide employee training and development and provide support for wages and benefits, maintain our capital improvements. We know we have some historic aging buildings, but we want to make sure that we still have resources to be able to do that, and then maintain the technology, hardware, and software that we so much rely on. When we look at why we continue to need these funds, the state funding formula is a very complicated factor. And what the state has done back in 1994, they put in what they call revenue limits. And they limited and basically froze in time the spending that school districts had on per pupils, and then the state allocated the raises. And what that did is it froze Manitowoc in time as a low spending school district. And when they raise funds moving forward, they raise to the same increase per pupil to every school district in the state. So an example would be very similarly that Manitowoc would receive $100 per pupil for an increase for the next annual year. And that increase comes from the state. We don't know that right now because we're still waiting for the governor's budget to be formalized and approved through that process. But what we do know is that if that's the process, every school district in the state gets the same amount, $100 per pupil. In Manitowoc, for example, we've got 5,000 pupils. So that $100 is multiplied by 5,000, and you can see that we would get $500,000. In many cases, that's a significant amount of money. And we understand that $500,000 is a lot of money. But when we look at our annual increases and the expectations that we have to increase utilities, expenses, healthcare, wages, we know that inflation is running at least 1.3%. And if you look at 80 million, 1% of 80 million is 800,000. And if we're receiving 500,000, we're already behind 300,000 before it started with just inflationary costs. That lack of funding. Yeah, you're not seeing it? Okay. Try that again. I'm going to pause here and make sure that my screen gets shared so that. Try that one more time. I just got an error message from my computer. So what I'm talking about is when we talk about that very specific funding formula, we see that the Manitowoc Public School District has. I'm just going to share my screen one more time. I apologize for that. And now we are working. All right. And so what we want to be able to do is give you some explanations of where do we spend our money, how does that money get spent, and how do we compare with others. So what we talk about with our referendums, we're talking about little to no tax impact. And if the referendum passes, we can explain what little or no tax impact is. In the first year right now, we anticipate that the levy, the net tax levy, and that's what the school district can control, will reduce or decrease by 1 cent. That's based on $7.81 currently of 1,000 equalized value to $7.80. Now, what I can tell you is that the Manitowoc Public School District has the ability to manage, to some extent, the levy. We do not manage the equalized value. That's what the state decides. Your assessed value is your local establishment. So either the city or the municipality you live in establishes your assessed value. And your assessed value typically doesn't change consistently. It changes over time. Your equalized value does change annually. So we anticipate that over the last 5 years, Manitowoc Public School District has seen an increase in the equalized value to the tune of 3.3%. Over the last 3 years, we've seen that equalized value at 5%. That equalized value, again, is established by the state, not by us, and that will also affect your cost, how much it costs. But what we're talking about is what the school district can control, and we are saying specifically that we're going to see a lessen of the levy. If the referendum passes, we still are looking at making $1.3 million in budget reductions over the next 3 years. That's doing our part to reduce the operating budget. We do know that we are using $1.3 million of fund balance currently. That's our district savings account in order to balance our current budget. And we know that's not something that's manageable for the full entire years. So we need to make some changes, and we're going to do that through making some difficult decisions internally. What we do know is that Manitowoc school property tax levy that I talked to you before of $7.81 is the lowest in Manitowoc County. And here's an example of that when I show where Manitowoc is. If you use $100,000 as value, in Manitowoc, a taxpayer will pay $7.81 or $781 to their taxing entity that goes to the Manitowoc Public School District. That same $100,000 value in Two Rivers would cost you $8.43. And that same $100,000 in Peel would cost $9.13. And if you happen to live in Reedsville, you're paying almost $1,100, right? So again, that's the amount of money, $100,000 value, different district, different amount of payment. What you do see is that Manitowoc's the best value of all. We're continuing to provide that. We would like to be able to have more resources, and what we do know is that Manitowoc is one of the lowest spending per pupil out of the state. So right now, if you rank, there's 420 school districts, Manitowoc spends 386. Part of it is that when I talked earlier in 1994, that place frozen in time. Manitowoc has always been a low spending district, and because of that, we're frozen and we're not able to maintain. The only way we can increase is by doing what we're doing right now, is asking the public to provide us with some additional supports through a referendum. Right now, the average public school spends about $13,000 per pupil, which is about $2,000 more than we do annually. If we use that as a multiplier, we would spend, if we spend the state average, we'd have $10 million more in our budget annually. So rather than being an $80 million budget, we'd be a $90 million budget. Significantly different resources available. We do know that when we go back, we look at operating expenses, we do want to maintain those quality programs. One of the things that we very much enjoy is our school forest. Again, opportunities for our kids to learn in a different environment. We want to make sure we can continue to provide great resources. When we look at per pupil spending over time, we see in 2008, we were spending just about $11,000 per pupil. And now you can see where we are right here. But what you see here is this gap. This is the state, and here it was $1,400, and now we're at $2,000. This gap is growing. The state average is growing faster than we are. If you look at where we are compared to the average, the Manitowoc Public School District is spending about the same as the state did on average back in 2008. So we see that we're not asking to get even to the average. We're just trying to maintain where we currently are and continue to provide those programs. Another factor that happens within our tax levy is the existence of the new private school voucher program. So what happens with private school vouchers, those are vouchers that are paid to our private schools for students who reside in the Manitowoc Public School District. Families can apply for a voucher. Voucher is applied for, and if you're eligible one time, you get that voucher for the rest of your career. The vouchers are 3 times the federal poverty limit. The example I would tell you is free and reduced lunch is about 50% of our population. In Manitowoc is 2 times the poverty limit. So 3 times the poverty limit would increase again. I think the national average is about $66,000 for a family of 4. The reason I share with you the private school voucher is not because it costs the Manitowoc Public School District additional, but this is the amount that is levied on our school district taxpayers. So the state voucher program said, we'll start these vouchers. This number right here is $1,500 and our $150,000, I apologize. And now it's $1.9 million. We're seeing this steady increase. And what happens is it doesn't affect necessarily how much the Manitowoc Public School District is spending, but what it does affect is the levy. And so what we see in here is the blue part, and the blue part is actually our levy. And you can see the red part is how much of our levy goes to private school vouchers. And we're seeing this significant increase in the red and really not an increase in the blue. So what that really means is, in this case, the amount of money that we're paying, or our taxpayers are paying to this private school voucher is 72 cents of our $7.81 levy. Back in 2016, that amount was about a penny. So we see significant increases of things that are not able to work with our kids. It's a factor not in our district operation, but in our levy. So we do want to make sure that we continue to communicate all the factors that happen within our school district. Another, I think, interesting piece is when we talk about where do we spend our money. And so this slide, I'll show, the next slide will not have the graph, but it'll have the details in the budget. And what it will show very specifically is, although Manitowoc Public School District spends less per pupil than the state average, it spends more in instruction. It spends the money in the right places. So this example shows that 61% of our per pupil budget goes to instruction, right? That's teaching and learning. The state average was 53, just slightly more, about $50 more per year we spend. On the same token, we spend less on other areas that maybe the state does. So in this case, we spend 6.6% of ours on administration. The state average is 7.7. So when we look at the end, we're spending less than the state still, but we still are spending it in the right spots. And I think that's an important factor. So when we summarize a little bit of what happens if the referendum fails, well, the district is asking for $4.3 million because we absolutely need it. We need it to continue to maintain our programs. If we don't have $4.3 million, we'll have to make reductions in staff, programs, capital improvements, and technologies. 80% of our budget is people, right? It's our staff, it's our teachers, it's our custodians, it's our secretaries, it's our administrators, food service, bus. Those are all pieces that we have that is made up of our 80% of our budget is staff and salary. If in fact we have to reduce, we would be looking at reduction of about 50 full-time staff members across all employee groups. That's a devastating number for us because we still would have 5,000 students anticipating and expecting the same kind of instructional supports and programs that they have now, and we wouldn't be able to continue to provide that. We know we would increase class sizes because we'd have to cut classroom teachers. We know it would reduce programs because we wouldn't have enough staff to be able to run the programs, and we know that we would have less supports for our kids. We also know that our current law prohibits school districts from bringing referendum back to the public for a year. And so absolutely a failure of the referendum would mean we would need to come back to the public if in the future if we chose to, but it would have to be after a year. So all of these cuts would have to take place. We do want to make sure we continue to provide opportunities for our kids. We know that we have a great school system and we want to continue to provide those supports. We want to make sure that people are understanding the facts, and we'll talk about those four pieces, right? We say, well, how much is it? It's $4.3 million. How much does it cost? We're talking about $7.81 to $7.80 on our net tax levy. And when we say, what happens if it fails? We know that there's a $4.3 million reduction, potentially 50 staff members, and additional $900,000 in reductions from our program. We do know that there are lots of other organizations that have done some research specifically on how to support schools. One of the things that is true, if you look at Wisconsin, from April of 2020 to April of 2021, we have had over 150 school districts who've gone to referendum. Actually, it's 155 if you look at the numbers, right? When you look at referendums, we see some of our neighbors: Reedsville, Howard Suamico, New Holstein, Wrightstown, Ashwaubenon, Seymour, Denmark. They are all going to referendum because the state funding formula is not supporting the school districts and providing them with what they need. So we need to ask for some help. In this case, we look at the Vision 2022, and if you remember a few years back, Lead Research sent out a survey. 1,000 people nearly indicated that the rate of value of the following items of our impact of our future of Manitowoc County. And our schools were number one, and our youth was number three. Our public is saying that schools are important, and it's necessary for us to invest. When we look at that same, they rate the importance of quality of life, and that quality of life contributes to our community on a scale of 0 to 10. Number one is K-12 education. And again, important to understand that K-12 education provides opportunities and importance of quality of life for all. So we're asking you to invest and consider investing into our schools again. We'll continue to do what we can to communicate to you and answer your questions. I will stop sharing my screen right now, and I know that there were a few questions that we gathered specifically on the website. If you go to the Manitowoc Public School District website where you were, and there are questions after this or for the next time, you absolutely can go there. And on that website, you can fill out a question. So I'm just going to kind of circle back and go to a couple of questions that were asked previously, and then try to look at if there's other questions that we can answer specifically from this presentation. So one of the questions asked, if taxes are not increased, where does the money come from to support the referendum? So there's lots of factors within school district funding. So one of the factors is that we currently have a $3.5 million referendum, and we're asking for a 4.3. So there's an $800,000 add that we're asking for. Manitowoc Public School District is aided by the state of Wisconsin, by our local taxpayers, and by the federal government. The aid comes based on, from the local taxpayers, based on what the state establishes as your property value, right? Your fair market value. When we talk about fair market value, we are estimating that there will be a 3% increase in fair market value. That means that where the levy will stay the same, it's possible, based on what your fair market value is, that that number is based on $100,000. So in Manitowoc, $100,000 worth of property, we estimate is going to be actually less, $7.80. If your property value is $100,000 or $200,000 or $150,000, the adjustment is made in that. The Manitowoc Public School District is also aided, and we're aided at about 60%. So about 60% of the money that the state gives us is equal to about 40% of what our local taxpayers. So on any given year, if we used just $100 as an example, the state maybe gives us 60 and our local taxpayers give us 40. If we spend that $100, If we don't spend $100, for example, if the referendum fails, 60% of that money, the $3.5 million or the 4.3 that we reduce, will be reduced the following year by the state because the state aids us based on how much we spend. So actually what would happen on year 2 of the referendum is our levy would increase likely by about 70 cents because the state is currently paying for that. And it's a kind of a funky deal, but that's exactly how the state spending works. We continue to talk to our legislatures about that's not fair for all, but that's how it works. So we anticipate a 3% increase in property value. If the property value increase is greater than 3%, likely the levy will fall more than $7.80. If the property value grows less than 3%, then the tax levy could grow a little bit more. But we do know that we're very conservative on a 3%. Over the last 3 years, we've seen a 5%, 5.3. We believe that's the case. Another question that was brought about is it says the Manitowoc tax levy is about 8 cents less than the next 3 higher districts. I think it's supposed to be 8%, okay, 8% less. And they're assuming that the assessed value is higher in Manitowoc than those in other cities. So actually, the truth is that's not the case. So when we look at $100,000 worth of value, let's say in Two Rivers, and the next block down is where the Manitowoc line is, the same $100,000 value is in Manitowoc. That $100,000 value is going to be pretty similar based on where you live, and it's the value is established based on the value of the property. In Two Rivers, you're going to pay $841 for that $100, and in Manitowoc, you're going to pay $780. Right now, the only way public schools can change that is by going to referendum to increase that levy, because it was frozen back in 1994. So likely, back in 1994, Two Rivers had a higher levy than Manitowoc did. So the percent doesn't really equate to how much money we spend on per pupil. The percent really depends on how much your value is for your entire properties. And again, I'm getting into some nitty gritty, and we'll put some examples on the website. But the lowest levies in the state likely come from school districts that have small populations and high property value. So the example I would give you, if you're familiar with Door County, Gibraltar has one of the lowest tax levies in the state. And it's not, and there's lots of interesting factors there, but their tax levy is really low because they have less than 500 students, and they have lots and lots of value in their property, lots of lake homes and lots of businesses that are from that Door County genre. And so their levy, the amount of money they need in order to get the property, in order to get the spending that they have, isn't as much as maybe other school districts. I would also articulate that Gibraltar spends about $18,000 per pupil, and again, where Manitowoc is spending just about 12. So a few different pieces there. There was another question. I think it was talking about COVID, and I think that's a fair question to say. How much savings we have up, and I've answered that question a number of times. I would tell you that running a school district in COVID is likely the most expensive year we've ever had. The example I would give you is this: all of our staff was paid because we're working. We didn't reduce the number of expectation we had for staff. We also know that we needed to increase the number of one-to-one devices. So, for example, we used to be one-to-one from 612. We're now one-to-one from K-12. That's over 1,000, almost 2,000 Chromebooks we added to our piece. We added about $18,000 a year in Wi-Fi supports for our students. We had to add supports for technology, cleaning, nurses. So in the real sense, that is absolutely a challenge, trying to balance both. When we look at the blended model we had at elementary, we had less busing, but we had double the routes, right? Because in elementary schools, we had kids going half a day, so they picked up once in the morning and once at noon, and then picked up once at noon and dropped off once in the afternoon. So our transportation cost during the blended model likely was twice as much as it was when we had our single model like we have now. I think there's some other questions just specifically about teachers, and they asked if teachers are refusing to go back, and that's not the case at all. We don't have anybody. We do have programs if someone has a medical reason, and we work through that process. This first year of the referendum, it says, is the tax decreased by 1 cent? So how much would the referendum actually increase our taxes? Well, What we've seen over the last 6 years is when the Manitowoc Public School District goes to referendum, if the referendum passes, we move forward and then the levy goes down. And the reason the levy goes down is because the state aids us at 60%. Remember what I told you before. So what happens technically, let's use $1 million rather than 800,000. The first year of the levy, 800,000 is added to the levy. The second year of levy, we've spent that 800,000, or let's call it $1 million now, and the state's going to aid $600,000 of that. Our levy will go down because the amount of money we get is still the same. Now the state's given us $600,000 more because we pay 60% with the state and 40% with our local taxpayer. That's not the same with every school district, and some of it has to do with our estimated overall property value, our student population. There's lots of factors in there. But we likely will see the levy go down after year 1, 2, and 3. That's what we've seen in 2015 when we passed the levy, and we saw that in 2018. When we went to levy in 2018, we established that we would go to $8.21, and we actually went to $8.05, and here we are now at $7.81. So there's lots of factors within the net tax levy that are difficult to explain, but what I can tell you is that the Manitowoc Public School District's tax levy, the piece that we control, I don't control how much your assessment is or how much the net value goes up from the state, that's gone down every year and it's at the lowest point it's been in 10 years. So I'm confident that we are going to be in the picture with a lower tax rate from the school district than we've had in the past. I think, yeah, so they asked, the question was, are there slides available? Yes, there's actually 2 presentations on our website. One on the website is what we call a Loom video. It's me talking through it. And another one is just a PDF that you can scroll through and look at those that information. So I'm just going to take a pause here. I think we've cleaned up most of the questions. And I would just like to say, first of all, thank you so much for giving us a half an hour or so of your time. It's really important that we continue to pass the message of the referendum on. Likely you received either today, tomorrow, or Saturday an informational flyer that will talk specifically about the details of the referendum. We have 2 more evening presentations that we'll share out. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions. And I know the board's happy to answer any questions. So I'll pause for a moment and turn it over to Mrs. Willis, and she can kind of give us some parting thoughts. And again, I very much appreciate the time you spent with us tonight. And if you have any specific questions, you can put it in that chat box. We'll leave it open for a little while longer, or you can contact a board member or myself. Kathy, thank you so much.
Hi again, guys. This is Kathy Willis from the board. Again, I'm just saying that the board did pass this for approval unanimously in January. Our district really needs these funds in order to continue and maintain the programs that we have. So if you have any questions, we're all really open to hearing from you. Please look at our website and find our email addresses or give us a phone call. Any of the board members would be happy to answer your questions. And so is Superintendent Holtzman. So please know that we're here for you. And we'll look forward to answering any of those questions for you. And we hope that you have a great day. And thanks for attending. Bye, guys.